January 13th, 1941. A federal courtroom in Camden, New Jersey. 6 feet 4 inches of broken man stands before the bench. Nucky Johnson, 57 years old. The red carnation still pinned to his lapel, like he was still the king of Atlantic City. He wasn't. The judge looked down through wire-rimmed glasses and sentenced him to 10 years in federal prison for tax evasion. Nucky didn't flinch. He didn't beg. He just adjusted his coat, nodded once at his wife Flossie, and walked out of the courtroom the same way he'd walked the boardwalk for 30 years. Like he owned the ground under his feet. He didn't. Not anymore. You probably know him as Steve Buscemi, skinny, cunning, a scheming little operator in a sharp suit on HBO's Boardwalk Empire. Forget all of that. The real Nucky Johnson was over 6 foot, 200 pounds, with shoulders like a longshoreman and a voice that could fill a ballroom without a microphone. He wore a fresh red carnation every single morning. He drove a powder blue Rolls-Royce down the boardwalk in broad daylight. He never personally killed a man. He didn't need to. Because in 1929 he hosted a meeting at the Ritz-Carlton Hotel that literally invented modern organized crime in America. Capone was there. Luciano was there. Lansky, Torrio, Costello. They all came to Atlantic City. They all came because Nucky Johnson told them to. This is the story of the man HBO sanitized, the treasurer of Atlantic County who ran a billion-dollar empire from a hotel suite. The political boss who took $500,000 a year in bribes in 1920s money and spent every dime of it, the last Prohibition king. And this is how he lost everything. Here's what the show never told you. Nucky didn't just run Atlantic City. He invented the model every American mob boss after him would copy. And when he fell harder than any of them. To understand Nucky, you have to understand his father, Smith Johnson, sheriff of Atlantic County back in the 1880s, a tall, hard Republican who taught his son one lesson before anything else. Politics is the only racket that's actually legal. Nucky was born on January 20th, 1883, in Smithville, New Jersey. A quiet farm boy, tall for his age, curious. He grew up watching his father trade favors at the kitchen table, watching deputies hand over envelopes, watching the way power worked in a small county where the right handshake mattered more than the right law. He attended Atlantic City public schools. He was bright. He could have gone to college. He didn't. By 1901, at 18 years old, he was already working as an undersheriff under his father. By 1908, at 25, he was sheriff of Atlantic County himself, youngest in the state. 2 years later, he was Atlantic County Treasurer, a title he'd hold for the next 30 years. That title is important because the title was a fig leaf. The real job was something else entirely. Nucky Johnson was the political boss of the Republican machine in South Jersey. And the Republican machine controlled every cop, every judge, every dock inspector, every liquor license, every saloon, every brothel, and every cent of municipal money in Atlantic County. He was 28 years old when he took the throne. He'd hold it for 30 years. Here's the thing about Atlantic City in 1920. The town wasn't like other American cities. It was built on one thing: sin. Tourists came down from Philadelphia and New York to do what they couldn't do at home: drink, gamble, visit prostitutes, eat oysters at 3 in the morning. The boardwalk wasn't a tourist attraction. The boardwalk was an open-air black market with a brass band playing on top of it. And when the 18th Amendment passed in 1919, Prohibition didn't shut Atlantic City down. It turned Atlantic City into the wettest town in America. Nucky understood something the federal government didn't. People were going to drink. The only question was who controlled the supply. So he made a decision. Atlantic County would be open. Wide open. Bootleggers could land their boats on the beach. Trucks could roll down the boardwalk in broad daylight loaded with Canadian whiskey. Speakeasies didn't need to hide. The cops weren't going to raid them because the cops worked for Nucky. The structure was beautiful in its simplicity. Every bootlegger who operated in Atlantic County paid Nucky a percentage. Every speakeasy paid a weekly tribute. Every brothel kicked up. Every illegal casino, every numbers runner, every dock worker who unloaded a crate of scotch, they all paid. Nucky took his cut, paid off the cops, paid off the judges, paid off the politicians in Trenton, and kept the rest for himself. By 1925, federal investigators estimated that Nucky Johnson was personally pocketing $500,000 a year. In today's money, that's roughly $9 million. Every year, tax-free, cash. And he spent it, all of it. You have to understand how Nucky lived. He occupied the entire 9th floor of the Ritz-Carlton Hotel on the boardwalk, not a suite, the entire floor. His personal apartment had a grand piano, oriental rugs, a private bar stocked with the best bootleg in the country, and a window that looked out over the ocean. He kept a chauffeur, a valet, a personal barber who shaved him every morning. He owned racehorses. He owned a stable of women. His wife Mabel had died young in 1912. He didn't remarry until much later, to a showgirl named Florence Osbeck, who everyone called Flossie. In between, Nucky kept company with chorus girls, actresses, and showgirls from every cabaret in town. Every morning, same routine. He'd wake up around 9. Barber would shave him. Valet would dress him in a custom 3-piece suit, fresh red carnation in the lapel, always a red carnation. Then he'd walk down to the lobby of the Ritz, where a powder blue Rolls-Royce limousine waited at the curb, driver in uniform. He'd ride down the boardwalk like a Roman emperor. Beat cops would tip their hats, tourists would point, children would wave, Nucky would wave back. He loved every second of it. But here's where it gets interesting. Because all that show, all that flash, all that powder blue Rolls-Royce nonsense, that was the cover. The real Nucky Johnson was a strategist. And in the spring of 1929, he was about to pull off the most important political move in American organized crime history. By 1929, Prohibition had created a crisis. Every major American city had a bootlegging boss. Chicago had Capone. New York had Luciano and Torrio. Cleveland had Mo Dalitz. Philadelphia had Boo Boo Hoff. They were all making millions. They were also killing each other. The St. Valentine's Day Massacre had happened in Chicago that February. 7 men lined up against a garage wall and machine-gunned by Capone's crew. The newspapers were screaming. The federal government was paying attention. The whole bootlegging empire was about to collapse under its own violence. Someone had to bring everyone to the table. Someone with no allegiance to any particular family. Someone with the political muscle to guarantee safe passage. Someone with a city wide open enough that no federal agent would dare interfere. That someone was Nucky Johnson. In May of 1929, Nucky sent out the word, "Come to Atlantic City. Bring your top men. We're going to fix this thing." They came. Al Capone arrived from Chicago in a private train car. Luciano came up from New York. Meyer Lansky, Frank Costello, Johnny Torrio, Dutch Schultz, Boo Boo Hoff from Philadelphia, Longines Willman from Newark, every major bootlegging boss in the eastern United States. Nucky met Capone personally at the train station. Big Al stepped off the platform with his entourage and demanded a suite at the Breakers Hotel. The Breakers turned him away. They didn't want Italians. Capone exploded, started shouting in the lobby. Nucky pulled him aside, calmed him down, and walked him over to the Ritz-Carlton, where Nucky's own floor was waiting. That story is documented. It's in the federal records. Capone never forgot it. For 3 days, from May 13th to May 16th, 1929, the most powerful gangsters in America met in conference rooms at the Ritz and walked the boardwalk together, hammering out details. They divided up territory. They agreed on price fixing for bootleg liquor. They created a system for resolving disputes without bloodshed. They formed what would later be called the National Crime Syndicate, the cooperative structure that would govern American organized crime for the next 50 years. The Five Families of New York, the Commission, the whole modern mafia, all of it. Born on the boardwalk in Atlantic City, hosted by Nucky Johnson. And Nucky took a cut of every deal that came out of that conference, because of course he did. Here's a detail nobody talks about. During the conference, photographers caught Nucky and Capone walking side by side on the boardwalk, Capone in a dark suit looking like a bull. Nucky towering over him, red carnation, powder blue tie, smiling like he was hosting a charity ball. Two of the most powerful criminals in America taking a leisurely stroll past beat cops who tip their hats. That photograph exists. You can look it up. It's one of the most extraordinary images in American crime history. After Atlantic City, Nucky's power doubled. He was now the political broker for the entire syndicate. When Capone needed protection from a federal investigation, he called Nucky. Luciano moved product through the Jersey ports. He paid Nucky. When Lansky needed a friendly judge, Nucky made the call. He'd built something nobody else had. Legitimate political power, layered on top of criminal infrastructure, protected by elected office. Through the early 1930s, Nucky kept his grip. He delivered Atlantic County for the Republican Party in every election. He personally controlled the votes of roughly 85% of the county. He could swing a state Senate race with a phone call. He could kill a federal investigation by calling a congressman. He owned the city's only newspaper through proxies. He had judges on his payroll, including the man who decided most of the county's criminal cases. But here's where the trap started closing. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt took office. Prohibition was repealed in December of that year. That alone would have crippled Nucky's bootlegging revenue. He pivoted. Doubled down on gambling, prostitution, numbers running. The boardwalk stayed wet. Tourists kept coming. The money kept flowing. But the political landscape had changed. Roosevelt was a Democrat. Roosevelt hated political bosses, and Roosevelt's Treasury Department had a new weapon they'd just perfected against Capone himself: tax evasion. Capone went to prison in 1931, 11 years, for not paying his taxes. The Treasury agents took notes. They studied the Capone case. They learned that the easiest way to bring down a mob boss was to follow the money. And in 1935, an Internal Revenue agent named William E. Frank started taking a hard look at Nucky Johnson of Atlantic County, New Jersey. The investigation took 5 years. Frank and his team interviewed hundreds of witnesses. They traced bank accounts. They subpoenaed hotel records. They tracked Nucky's spending habits. The Rolls Royce, the horses, the hotel suite, the chorus girls. The thing that killed Nucky in the end wasn't a wiretap or an informant. It was a simple math problem. The Atlantic County treasurer made a salary of about $6,000 a year. His documented spending was closer to $120,000. Where was the rest coming from? In May of 1939, a federal grand jury indicted him. Income tax evasion, failure to report bribes, kickbacks, and graft as income. The trial began in July of 1940 in Camden. It lasted 3 weeks. The prosecution called over 100 witnesses, bookmakers, madams, bootleggers turned state's evidence. One after another, they sat on the stand and testified to handing Nucky envelopes of cash, weekly, monthly, for years. Nucky's defense was simple. He claimed the money was political contributions, not personal income. Loans from friends, gifts. The jury didn't buy it. On July 22nd, 1940, after deliberating for 11 hours, they came back with a guilty verdict. Nucky stood there in his three-piece suit, red carnation still in the lapel, and didn't react. That January 13th, 1941 sentencing, 10 years, federal prison. He served 4 years and 5 months at Lewisburg Federal Penitentiary in Pennsylvania, inmate number 7,525. He worked in the prison library. He read books. He played chess. The man who'd hosted Capone at the Ritz-Carlton now slept on a steel cot in a 6x8 cell. Visitors said he handled it with dignity. He didn't complain. He didn't snitch. He didn't beg for early release. He just did his time. While he was inside, Atlantic City fell apart. The political machine he'd built collapsed within months. His successor, a man named Frank Farley, tried to keep the operation running, but the federal government wasn't going to let another Nucky emerge. The war was on. The Treasury Department, the FBI, every federal agency now knew that political bosses could be broken with paperwork. Atlantic City's golden era was over. The tourists started going elsewhere. The hotels started losing money. The boardwalk got shabbier every year. Nucky was released on parole in August of 1945. He came out a different man. His health was poor. His money was mostly gone. The IRS had seized assets. Legal fees had eaten the rest. Flossie was still with him. They moved into a modest house in Atlantic City, then a smaller one, then a smaller one. The man who'd lived on the 9th floor of the Ritz-Carlton was now renting rooms in boarding houses. He tried to stay relevant. He'd walk the boardwalk in the afternoons, still wearing a suit, still wearing the red carnation. Old-timers would tip their hats. Tourists didn't know who he was. He'd sit on the same bench every day, watching the ocean, watching the waves break against the pilings he'd once owned. He gave a few interviews. He never named names. He never wrote a memoir. He took every secret he had to the grave. By the late 1950s, he was nearly blind. His health was failing. The money was completely gone. Flossie cared for him as long as she could. But in 1968, they checked him into a nursing home in Northfield, New Jersey, just outside Atlantic City. He was 85 years old. He lived there for 3 more years. Most days, the nurses said, he just sat by the window. Sometimes he'd hum show tunes from the 1920s. Sometimes he'd ask for a red carnation. They'd bring him one. He'd thank them politely. He died on December 9th, 1968, 85 years old, heart failure. The man who'd invented modern organized crime was buried in a quiet Catholic ceremony at Holy Cross Cemetery in Mays Landing. The local newspaper ran a small obituary. National papers barely noticed. Capone was already legendary. Luciano was already a myth. Lansky was still alive, running operations in Miami. But Nucky had been forgotten. The HBO show would change all that. Boardwalk Empire premiered in 2010 and ran for 5 seasons. Steve Buscemi as Nucky Thompson. The name changed slightly for legal reasons. The character was a sanitized fiction. The real Nucky was bigger, louder, more charming, more brutal, more honest about what he was. He didn't pretend to be conflicted. He didn't agonize over his sins. He was a politician who took money to look the other way, and he understood himself perfectly. That's what made him dangerous. He had no illusions. He had no shame. Here's what the show got most wrong. Buscemi's Nucky was a small man swimming in a big pond, constantly threatened, constantly negotiating from weakness. The real Nucky was the biggest man in the pond. For 20 years, he never feared anyone. Not Capone, not Luciano, not the federal government, not until Roosevelt, and by then, it was too late. What does Nucky Johnson's story tell us? It tells us that the modern American Mafia was not invented by Italians in New York. It was invented by an Irish Protestant politician in Atlantic City who figured out that the most powerful criminal in any city is not the man with the gun. It's the man who owns the cops who carry the guns. Capone needed Nucky's protection. Luciano needed Nucky's permission. The whole structure that mob historians attribute to the Sicilians was actually pioneered by an Anglo-American political boss who never made anyone's bones because he didn't have to. It also tells us something darker. The system Nucky built didn't really die when he went to prison. It just got more sophisticated. The arrangement between organized crime and corrupt political machines didn't end in 1941. It got better at hiding. The lesson every mob boss after Nucky learned was simple. Don't be flashy. Don't drive a powder blue Rolls-Royce down the boardwalk. Don't wear a red carnation. Don't let them see you. Lansky learned this lesson and died a free man with millions hidden offshore. Capone didn't learn it and died syphilitic and broken. Nucky was somewhere in between. He learned it too late. Enoch Lewis Johnson spent 30 years as the most powerful unelected man in New Jersey. He took bribes worth what would be hundreds of millions of dollars today. He hosted the meeting that created modern organized crime. He drove the boardwalk like an emperor. He wore a red carnation every day of his adult life. And in the end, he died alone in a nursing home, blind, broke, asking for flowers. That's the real story of Nucky Johnson. Not the sanitized version, not the prestige television fantasy. The actual man who built an empire on graft and charm and political muscle, and who learned, the hard way, that no machine lasts forever. The kings of the boardwalk all end up in the same place, a small room, a quiet bed, a nurse who doesn't know who you used to be. That's the price of running the show. Sooner or later, the show ends, and when it does, all you've got left is the carnation. If you found this story fascinating, hit subscribe. We drop a new mob documentary every week. Drop a comment. What Prohibition-era boss should we cover next?